As the COVID-19 pandemic rages on, nations are taking measures to mitigate the effect of the pandemic and shore up their economies. And here in Africa, and more importantly in Nigeria, the governments are enforcing strict measures to curb the spread of the virus by imposing lockdowns. Of course, much unanswered questions remain about the national and regional economic impact at the micro and macro levels, given that Nigeria in particular is made up of more of the informal sector. There are models that Nigeria can actually adopt in fighting this pandemic. Well, joining us now to x-ray this is a professor of African Studies, University of Colorado Boulder, Professor Austin Okibo. Good morning, Professor. Thanks for joining us on the program. Now, we've seen Nigeria taking some restrictions that seem to mirror the measures being taken in Western nations such as the United States, the UK, and all that. But without attention to the operational differentials between these economies, watching from the outside now, how do you see all this?
Yeah, good morning, BC, and to your viewers in Nigeria. You're asking me about how do I see the situation in Nigeria currently?
Yes.
Okay, honestly, I think so far the story at least is looking a little bit more promising, although those of us watching from outside here are a little worried about what the final outcome will be, given the fact the demographic distribution in Nigeria and the congested,ness and the informal systems that we operate in. So, but we're a little bit more hopefully that it wouldn't get as bad as what we are seeing here in the United States and Italy, because that would be very, very difficult. It could overwhelm the government. But so far, we are kind of encouraged.
But what other potential economic fallouts do you possibly see for Nigeria, and why?
Well, the other fallouts we see, I mean, I will have to look at it, take it from the angle of thinking about the fact that more than 70% of Nigeria's economy is in the informal sector. And the population that works in that informal sector, that about 70% of Nigeria's workforce operating in the informal sector, contributing to 65% of the national GDP. That can be very devastating. The implication is that if the measures such as these lockdowns were to be widely implemented, it will have a very lasting impact and devastating impact on the national GDP. We will be looking at a potential economic depression. Second, both at the micro and macro levels. Secondly, one that we still have not even started paying attention to is what happens after the pandemic, because this is bound to have serious impact on human capital, upon which forms the cornerstone of the national economy.
But what of the sectors do you believe would be mostly impacted?
Of course, is the informal sector, because this is a sector where people, the service industry, you think about the service industry, you think about the traders, people whose livelihood, majority of the people who operate in this informal sector are people whose daily living on a day-to-day basis during the week depends on what happens in their business the previous day. Now, when people can't do their businesses, sell their products, go out and do some work, then they have no way of surviving the next day. And that is, so the formal sector, which is mostly the IT sector and the banking sector and multinational corporations, may be able to weather it, but the informal sector will feel the impact mostly.
Now, the president announced that the social interventions programs such as the trader money and the farmer money should commence immediately for 3 months. Do you think that this will help in any way?
It should help, but the difficulty, the challenge, as I'm thinking about that, is what is the mechanism that the government is using to determine who can benefit from this? One of the challenges we've had in Nigeria in Nigeria's development and even assessing and weighing economic activities is tracking how individuals at the micro level, the dynamic relationship between the micro levels of economic activity and the macro levels of economic activity. And at the micro levels, these the people who participate there who are going to be the beneficiaries of what the president is benefiting from, to the extent that that is a very good move and is commendable. The challenge is what mechanisms do they have in place to make sure that the benefit is reaching the people for whom they are intended.
Now, but what if the structural differentials mean that, of course, Nigeria cannot just replicate the measures being used in Europe and the United States, for instance? Is there a workable measure or model or perhaps a solution to the Nigerian and African experience?
A very good question there, BC. As I'm looking at what the task force is doing and the economic task force, that especially as they're looking at assessing the economic impact of the pandemic, I'm a little worried personally, and some of my colleagues here who've had this conversation recently, is that Nigeria is seeming to model what is happening in the United States and Europe, whose economic structure is very different from ours. In fact, if there are two countries that we can look at to see how they're working it out, it will be China and India, who have large populations and big economies, but much of their economy is also operating in the informal sector. I give you an example. China, of about 56% of China's urban economy operates in the informal sector. So somehow, both China and India resemble what Nigeria has. And if we are looking for any model that can help, we shouldn't be looking at the United States. We shouldn't be looking at Italy or Europe. We should be looking at some of these Asian countries.
But do you see Nigeria well positioned to be able to weather this storm?
I think so. I think so far, and in fact, some people are looking at, even from the United States here, are looking at Nigeria, members of World Health Organization and people involved in security studies and economic studies and global health are thinking that Nigeria already has something in place that is working for them. If you think about from the first time we recorded a first case of the coronavirus in late January, and the fact that we still don't have a very explosive condition now, I think that the NCDC, the National Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Ministry of Health, I think they have learned a lesson from the Ebola outbreak of 2014. It's me they are doing a good job. I hope that Nigerian citizens can cooperate, and we should be able to come out of it left-hearted.
The Presidential Task Force has been charged with assessing the economic impact of the pandemic. Now, is there more they can actually do in the light of these challenges coming from the reality of the informal sector in Nigeria?
Of course, there is much they can do. That's what I'm talking about here. Right now, as I'm looking at the statements they're making, my concern and the concerns of some of my colleagues here focusing on looking at what is going on in Nigeria and the continent wide is that in the case of Nigeria, the task force need to pay more attention to the informal sector and start thinking about ways to address that problem, including if we are going to do shutdowns, if we are going to take any specific drastic measures, paying attention that we occupy a peculiar space and dealing with a peculiar situation. Our situation is different from most of the rest of the developed industrialized world. Right now, the task force, I don't think they are talking enough, paying attention enough to what is happening in that sector, including the rural populations of the country. And remember that much of Nigerian population exists in the rural and suburbans, not in the urban.
But the president has named the vice president, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, as the head of an economic sustainability committee that will implement strategies to alleviate the sufferings of Nigerians due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, how would you react to this, and what do you expect them to do?
It's a welcome development. I wish that move had been made a little earlier, like a month or two ago. But I think it's a welcome development. What needs to be done also is that I think some specialists, economic specialists, not just those who are serving the cabinet, but those who are focusing and who are intellectuals, technocrats that understand the dynamics of all of this need to be brought in. And so people who also have studied the Nigerian economic system and understood how the public-private partnership can cooperate and in a dynamic way to help deal with the problem. And this is a very opportune time for us to look at that. And let me say something here. You see, we don't necessarily have to only focus on economists. Believe you me, at this point in time, sociologists, anthropologists, people who understand the social dynamics of diseases and the anthropological dimensions need to be brought in to become part of the team and the task force.
Professor, you work in the educational system and schools are closed, but yet you're able to teach from home now. Here we have schools closed as well, and students are all at home doing nothing perhaps. Now, how much of an impact do you think this would have, not just on the economy, but even in terms of security?
Oh yeah, but well, to be precise, global health is anything related to public health touches seriously on national security. And this is something one of the challenges we always in Nigeria is that our tendency to compartmentalize the various sectors of life. When you have a public health problem as this COVID-19 with just economic impact, it ultimately spills over into the issues of national security. So definitely it's going to have an impact. That's why experts in the various sectors need to be part of the task force. It doesn't have to be just public health workers or economists. Experts from different sectors need to be brought in so that we'll be thinking in a very holistic way.
Professor of African Studies, University of Colorado Boulder, Professor Austin Okigbo, thanks for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome, Bisi.